Quiet. There is no one around. Only the pale moon stares indifferently at the darkened earth. I decided to leave the car in the next street so that the noise of the engine would not wake up the curious neighbors. I opened the gate of my house with the key, glad once again that I had greased the hinges. I turned the handle and found myself on the slab-lined path that led to the front porch. Good thing it wasn't gravel, or my footsteps would have been heard a mile away. Like a ninja, I silently made my way to the front door. I quickly disarmed the alarm and inserted the key into the keyhole. The lock clicked quietly, and I was in the spacious hallway. The house was cooler than it was outside. Anne must have turned on the air conditioning for the night. I looked around. No one. I could hear the ticking of the antique clock hanging on the wall. I headed for the stairs leading to the second floor. Slowly, so as not to squeak the steps, I climbed to the top. The light of the moon hardly illuminated the corridor, so it was pitch black. I noticed the narrow strip of light that barely shone through the loose bedroom door. I stepped close to the door and listened. There was snoring coming from inside. It was unlikely that in the time I had been away from home my Anne had taken to this male pastime. So there was someone else in there besides Anne. I opened the door cautiously. It creaked softly and a lovely picture appeared before my eyes. It made me smile. A naked shepherdess and a shepherd boy were sleeping cuddled together in our matrimonial bed. Rural pastoral. I could paint pictures of them. I would have painted them if my wife Anne had not been the shepherdess and some loud snoring hairy monster had been the shepherd. My wife rested her disheveled head on her lover's curly-haired chest and seemed to be having some marvelous dream. She was smacking her lips and smiling happily. I had a rough idea of what she might have been dreaming about. I sat down in the chair and sat silent for a while. Then I shook my head and walked over to the bed. He put the gun in his left hand, and with his right he gently scratched the hairy monkey's chest. The curly-haired lover slowly opened his eyes and blinked. Surprise! As he began to rise, mercilessly dropping my wife's head from his chest, I punched him in the jaw with all my might. The wife-lover groaned and lost consciousness. What did you want? A knockout. Anne woke up from his careless movement. For a while she couldn't understand what was happening, and then horror appeared in her eyes. Calvin, it's not what you think, she whispered. How corny. She must have read too many women's love stories. I wonder what I'm supposed to think when I find you in our bed with a hairy, smelly man. I grinned, and Anne cringed at my grin. That you tripped and accidentally stepped on his soap, or something else. Then tell me what. But my Anne was silent. Somehow she couldn't come up with a truthful excuse. I sighed sympathetically. Poor girl. From the looks of it, her hairy Chebureshka resembled a watermelon vendor from the Central Market. A guest from the sunny south, so to speak. Yes, it's come to Anne. Couldn't find someone decent, or she was in such a hurry that she had no choice. So she got the first guy she could find into bed. If she was a young girl who saw a man's stub for the first time and melted with lust. But no, the mother of the family, who has been with me through many hardships of life, 34-year-old woman. Yes, what's wrong with people? All these thoughts were buzzing in my head. I had only one way out. Kick under the heel point to throw cheating wife on the street, along with her shaggy monster. My silence gave Anne hope. She perceived the long pause as my weakness and decided that her husband could not part with such a treasure as her. Calvin, I'll explain everything. She started, but I interrupted her. Get dressed and get out of here. What? She exclaimed in amazement. You heard me. And take your shit-eater with you. I tossed her the dress that had been tossed carelessly on the chair. At that moment, the curly-haired lover came to his senses. He grumbled something indignantly in an unfamiliar language. I see, from excitement, he had forgotten Russian words. Apparently, his vocabulary was not large enough. I pointed the gun at his clothes. He instantly understood everything, grabbed his pants and t-shirt, and without further ado rushed to the door. What are you waiting for? I turned to my wife. Shall I speed things up? Anne darted after her lover, and I heard their bare feet tapping on the wooden steps. The front door slammed, and a minute later the gate. Well done, quick retreat, skilled. Who do you think you are? My father-in-law, the chairman of the board of directors of Sidmash concern, Prokhor Petrovich Gromov, was furious. All you have is because you're married to my daughter. And that's the only reason I tolerate your ass in my company. I stood across from the great superior's desk and was frankly bored. That this conversation would take place I knew when I threw his daughter and her lover out of my house, so I didn't expect to hear anything new. What a proud man. Mr. Gromov continued his verbal abuse. His wife, you see, cheated on him. You'll get over it. Well, the girl got naughty while you were away. She's not going to divorce you. And you sent her out the door. And a respectable man, my Italian partner too. And you beat him up. So here's the deal. If you don't calm down, I'll throw you out of the company and put you in jail. For beating up a man. You know what I can do. The father-in-law sat down in the chair and poured a glass of water. Sit quietly and don't show your face, or you won't even see your children. He shouldn't say that about the children. We still need to check whose children they are. After what happened, I didn't believe in anything and I didn't trust anyone. If they're mine, they're not going anywhere. They'll stay mine, especially since the eldest is already 15. The youngest is 8, but he's not a baby either. Well, if they're not mine, I'll make my decision on my own. Whether I live with your whore daughter or not, I'll decide for myself. Looking my father-in-law straight in the eye, I answered, I'm not afraid of prison. People live there too. Somehow, I'll endure it. As for your office, I have already given to the personnel application for dismissal. I've moved out of the house, so she can drag a whole pack of your partners there. Mr. Gromov didn't expect such insolence from me. He frantically gulped open air, unable to utter even half a word. Well, that's exactly what I wanted. Leaving the office, I purposely rattled the door, which made the receptionist jump in her chair. At that moment, Anne entered the reception. It seems that she was nearby, waiting for her father to rein in her stubborn husband. She grinned at me, expecting me to throw myself at her feet and beg for reconciliation. There was no other way. What's a beggar to do? Especially if he's used to the good life. But I passed by without turning my head. Not everything in this world is subject to her plans. I went into my former office, grabbed a box of my stuff, and headed for the elevators. Calvin, wait. I heard my ex-wife's voice behind me. Don't be crazy. Nothing happened. Don't make any hasty decisions. She managed to follow me into the elevator. You realize that I did it in the interests of the company. It's nothing personal, but a very lucrative contract has been signed. Anne was speaking in rapid succession, afraid that I would not want to listen to this gibberish. That's what I understand, self-sacrifice. In the interests of her father's company, my wife spread her legs. Well then, of course, that explains it. Maybe she's been smoking or doing cartwheels, or maybe she's always been such an impenetrable fool. I wonder how many years she's been passing prospective customers. No, we should definitely check on the kids. Calvin. Anne grabbed my sleeve. Let's talk. After all, I love you. We have kids. I took her hand off my sleeve with 2 fingers, squeamishly. There's nothing more to talk about. You can sleep with your father's clients without anyone interfering. Anne's eyes began to fill with tears. She wanted to say something else, but the employees were already looking back at us, and she just stood there silently watching me leave, unable to stop me. I handed my pass to the security guard and walked out into the parking lot, put the box in the back seat of the car, and sat behind the wheel. It looked like this car was my most prized possession to date. I pulled out of the parking lot. The rear mirror reflected a crying Anne with her hands clasped to her chest. That's it. The past didn't count. I didn't have a place to live in this town. At first I decided to stay in a hotel. Not an expensive one, but a modest one. I knew one on the outskirts of town, so I went straight there. I paid for the room and took the key and went to my temporary lodging. One room, a closet against the wall, a 1.5 size bed, a bedside table with a lamp, a flat-screen TV hanging on the wall. That's all the furnishings. It's okay, it'll do for a while. I'll finish my business and get out of this town. Pulled out my cell phone, dialed the number that was hardwired into my head. There's someone there to hear you. There was an unfamiliar voice in the receiver, but it didn't bother me. I'm here about the job. Uncle Max said I could call this number. I tried to speak smoothly, without showing emotion. Wait a minute. There was a pause at the other end. Then a man's voice said, "Unfortunately, we have nothing to please you yet. We have already taken a man in June, but just in case, send us your resume." The connection was broken. I turned on my laptop and typed in the search engine the necessary password, which I was told by the unknown interlocutor. The closed site had information for me. "So, welcome back, Stan." I managed to sleep until 8 o'clock. I was awakened by a loud knock on the door. That's how plumbers, police, and cheating husbands knock. I opened the flimsy door, yawning. "Mr. Calvin, you're under arrest for battery on Mr. Lionelli. Do you have a weapon on you?" The head of the assault team was literally burning me with his eyes. "Of course I do." I took a blued revolver out of my jacket pocket and handed it to the policeman. You should have seen how the lieutenant's eyes glittered predatorily. "Do you have a gun permit?" "Why, it's a souvenir, a lighter. Friends gave it to me." The policeman, as somehow immediately became quiet and nodded to his partner. The sleepy sergeant skillfully handcuffed me and escorted me to the car. My father-in-law always keeps his promises. I was put in a cage and left alone for a while. I rolled up my jacket, put it under my head, and lay down on the hard bench. Prison is prison, but it doesn't hurt to sleep. The prison door rattled again. "Calvin." "Hello." The man who spoke was an imposing man with a noble gray hair on his temples who looked me over carefully. "Are you all right? I hope the investigator hasn't talked to you yet." "Not yet, Solomon Markovich." I threw my jacket over my shoulders and greeted my lawyer by the hand. An escort policeman in crumpled uniform pants escorted us to the investigator. The rest was a matter of technique. Solomon Markovich quickly explained to the investigator that everything was not as it was in the victim's statement. On the contrary, it was me who was defending myself from an unknown citizen who had entered my house with criminal purposes. In self-defense, I struck this citizen in the jaw. I didn't know that he was invited by my wife for sexual pleasures. The investigator pretended to believe the lawyer and released me on my own recognizance. 2 hours had passed since my arrest. "Well done, Solomon. Top notch." After saying goodbye to the lawyer, I went to a cafe. I didn't have time for breakfast in the morning. It was going to be a long day and I needed to eat. This cafe was hard to miss. Already from afar, the name, typed in big glowing, even in the daytime, letters, caught my eye. All the windows facing the street were covered with curtains made of camouflage netting. The heavy door, upholstered with steel strips, made it clear that the visitor was entering a different world, a world of rugged men and delicious food. Yes, the Wild Duck Cafe knew how to surprise. I looked around the interior of the dining room with curiosity. On the walls, in the frames and under glass, hung time-worn electric guitars, on both sides illuminated not bright fluorescent bulbs. On the podium, at the farthest wall, stood an old Harley, clearly warning the casual customer that he had entered the territory of the biker fraternity. In the partitions between the guitars there were horns of once-killed animals, under which picturesque biker posters were nestled. There were few customers and a brisk waiter escorted me to my table. He easily persuaded me for a large mug of light beer, sea salad with shrimp, seafood julienne, and salmon steak. I uncomplainingly agreed with the caterer and prepared to wait. While the food splendor I ordered was being prepared, I was leisurely sipping my beer involuntarily listening to the conversation on raised tones at the far end of the hall, right behind the bar. Finally, the sea salad arrived. I paid tribute to the delicious shrimp, and my thoughts plunged into the sordid reality by themselves. What to do next? The first order of business was to check on the kids. My next steps would depend directly on that. I'd like to punish the prostitute and her family, especially since the father himself was a procurer. You have to love money to sell your own daughter's body. But apparently Anne liked to honey trap daddy's partners. Well, and then I was going to disappear, wiping nearly a quarter century out of my life. No snot, just a pity for time wasted on a worthless man. It wasn't the betrayal I was going to avenge. It was the 25 years of my life that had been stolen. To say I was indifferent to my ex-wife and children. No, my heart was constantly aching and my brain was drilling only one question. How can you be such a mean bitch? Confessing your love to me and sleeping with other men at the same time? Or is it normal in this day and age where the word fidelity only elicits ironic laughter? As Anne said, it's nothing personal, just work. It's just, Daddy asked. Don't soap. Husband's not a wall, he'll move. That's how cheating wives assuage their conscience, isn't it? A noise at the bar distracted me from my sad thoughts. Either the interlocutors did not agree on the quality of beer, or someone's face seemed not handsome enough, but clearly a fight was brewing. As they say, senseless and merciless. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw two uniformed muzzies appear from behind the doors, ready to step in and restore order at any moment, realizing that the riot wouldn't end that easily. A few random customers got off their seats and quickly left the establishment. They seemed to know how it would end. I, on the other hand, nonchalantly continued to savor the salad and languish in anticipation of the julienne. Finally, the boil burst. There was a distinctive sound of a thud, and someone's body, dressed in a leather sleeveless jacket, flew headfirst down the aisle. There was the sound of breaking glass. Clearly, it was the Rose. Someone screamed, sounded like a woman. An overturned table rattled. The fun was picking up. Now the guards are getting involved. One of the fighters hit my table. I barely had time to bounce, not letting go of the plate with sea salad. While the poor guy was trying to get up, clinging to the table legs, an empty bottle flew into his head. The kid jerked and fell silent. In my side vision, I saw some big guy coming at me, with a clear intention to harm my health. They were trying to pull me into the bloody vortex of the fight. All right, at least I'm getting some air. Without waiting for the spit, I picked up the running cretin and hit him in the fall with my fist on the back of his head. Okay, -1. I looked around the battlefield with an eagle eye, noting the guards lying on the floor. Only the character with the rose was truly dangerous. I jumped on the bar and slammed the toe of my shoe into the enemy's head. The broken bottle fell out of his hand. The woman, most likely swept by the stray wind into this maelstrom of unrestrained merriment, even shrieked. I jumped, knocking out another motorcyclist in flight. I was alone. I don't know if the last one was right or not, but I sent him to the floor with a sharp blow to the throat. I think that's it. Yeah, I'm really relieved. Blood, that's what I've been missing since yesterday. Let's get out of here. I patted the pockets of the last sufferer and pulled out the keys to the motorcycle. Then I slipped the waiter some money and a tip. I walked quickly to the parking lot and saw 3 bikes parked almost at the curb. I shoved the keys at random into the ignition of the nearest one. A second later, the engine rumbled and I was already speeding up. Yes, God loves drunks and cuckolds. Suddenly, I felt someone sit behind me and put his arms around my torso. I'm with you. A woman's voice shouted in my ear. The adrenaline did calm my nerves a little and dulled the pain in my heart a little. I raced almost in the middle of the street without paying attention to the honking, indignant motorists. After a couple of kilometers of motorcycle slalom, I turned into an alley. I drove about 200 meters and slowed down at the curb. Well, here we are, I said to the passenger, whose face I hadn't seen yet. Most likely, The offended biker has already reported to the police about the theft of a steel donkey and already announced a planned interception. I turned around. The cornflower eyes of a young blonde girl were staring at me. Her short dress was pulled up, dismantling her gorgeous tanned legs. I stared at her for a while, trying to say something. Then I just waved my hand and hurried to the nearest alley. Man, a hoarse female voice caught up with me. What about me? It was said in such a tone that I could not leave her alone. Hurry up. I turned to the blonde. When she got off the bike, her leg rose up over the seat, revealing the blue panties that tightly encased her firm ass. To match her eyes, suddenly a stray thought popped into my head. Something similar had already happened in my life. Dinah looked at herself in the mirror by the door. She sighed. That's how I'm going to live with it. Grisha, her boss, called her and asked her to meet him in the city in a cafe. She knew what he wanted, but she didn't know how he would react to what she would tell them. She took the large bag she usually carried with her. It might not have been all that stylish, but it had everything a mother of three needed. Taking the keys, she looked at her reflection again. I really am an idiot, she said aloud and slowly closed the door behind her. As she drove to meet Grisha, her thoughts returned to that party in the pulpit. She was well aware that she wasn't going anywhere without Sasha, but almost at the last minute he had been called away on an important experiment, and he had persuaded her to go without him. Darling, you're already dressed. The kids are at the babysitter's, and you certainly don't want to stay here while I work. Besides, the party will be full of your colleagues, and I'd feel more comfortable working and not be distracted by the thought of you being bored alone. So she went, and really had a good time. She went around and enjoyed the food, the conversation, and the drinks. Perhaps she enjoyed the drinks too much. She shook her head. She wasn't going to blame anyone or anything but herself. She did drink enough to relax. Quite a lot, in fact. But no amount of drinking justified her behavior. She went out the back door to get some fresh air to clear her head. The light buzzing was pleasant, but she knew that now she would have to ask someone to escort her home. She took a deep breath and flinched nervously when someone spoke. Dinah, what are you doing here alone and unsupervised? Grisha, what are you? Are you trying to give me a heart attack? She laughed and walked over to him. He's definitely good with himself, Dinah thought. Tall, blonde, handsome. He was such a contrast to Sasha, who was stocky and dark-haired. Not that Sasha wasn't as handsome as Grisha, but Grisha had a twist on the stars that made women melt. Even she was guilty of looking at him at work, and even more so here. But it was a harmless reminder on her part. He never went beyond light flirting and nothing more. You're cold, he sounded confident. Grisha took off his sports jacket and threw it over her shoulders. Dinah really felt good. She was wearing a black sleeveless dress that left her shoulders open. It felt good inside, but a slight chill was felt in the air. Thank you. No problem. He smiled. That's what friends are for. Without giving her a chance to speak, he continued. Seriously, what are you doing here? And where is Sasha? You always have him with you. She sighed sadly. Busy, and I just wanted a little break from all this smoke. I don't understand how people can breathe in there. I see, but it's getting pretty chilly in here. How about, he laughed and bowed, that I escort my lady down the corridor and show him the new office. We'll stay away from the smoke and the cold at the same time. Well, Grisha, this is so unexpected. She laughed back. You want to show me your diplomas. So I saw them. Will it help seduce you? He teased. Such a joke, she reproved with a smile. I'm sorry, and I'll behave myself. He defiantly offered her his hand. They'd walked along the soft carpet of the corridor until he stopped and unlocked the door. Already head of the department. That's something new, Grisha. Congratulations. When did this happen? Just a few days ago. I just had time to move everything out of my old office and hook it up here, and luckily everything's working just fine. The office really was beautiful. The dark furniture was accentuated by the light wood paneling and the bright curtains being draped at the moment. "It really is a beautiful study," she commented, and absently took his jacket off his shoulders and hung it on the back of his chair. "Yes, it is beautiful," he remarked softly. His hands touched gently, her shoulders stopping there. "But not as beautiful as you." She couldn't even tell herself how it began. It seemed only that they were standing in his office. His hands touched her shoulder lightly. The next moments they were in an embrace. He was kissing her wildly. Placing her hands on his shoulders, she sort of pushed him away once, another, a third. Each thrust was weaker than the last. "Oh God, Dina, I wanted you for so long," Grisha exhaled, pulling her to him. The part of Dina's brain that screamed that she was making a mistake fell silent under the suffocating desire that overpowered her. Then she was fully immersed in what was going on there with that handsome man. It was an amazing intimacy. When they were done, she was still naked. And he pulled out his phone from somewhere and captured her like this. From the flash, his sanity suddenly returned. Terrified of what she had done, she threw on her dress, slipped her underwear into her purse, and quickly sprinted out of the office and out. Dina arrived home, dived into the shower, as if the hot water could somehow wash away the incredible stupidity she had just committed. When Sasha finally got home, she pretended to be asleep. He curled up on the bed, and she snuggled up against him, trying to lie still so as not to disturb him. She finally drifted into an anxious sleep. The next day was no better. After everyone had gone to work and school, she sat down at the kitchen table and began to think. Not only had she betrayed Sasha, but she had done it without hesitation. 15 years of loyalty had gone down the drain in one fell swoop. Well, it had happened. She felt terrible. But in no way was she going to act like what had happened might happen again one day. Dina had heard that supposedly the first affair can be the hardest. For her, this would certainly be her last. "Damn it, Dina," she said to herself out loud. But it was so good. A few days passed, and she began to calm down a little. She couldn't decide whether she should confess to Sasha. She knew it would hurt him terribly, perhaps unforgivably. At the same time, the honesty they had always shown each other demanded a confession. She made up her mind and thought it over. There was no way she could come to a decision. Perhaps by Saturday night, which they always tried to spend together, it would be clear how to behave. Then on Friday the phone rang. "Hello, hi Dina. We need to talk." "Gregory, I'm not sure that's necessary." "I don't really think so." His voice was full of determination. "You need to hear what I have to tell you." "Okay, at the cafe at 1 o'clock. It'll be all right, don't be late." He hung up abruptly. The drive there took forever. On the way, Dina mulled over and discarded a dozen different scenarios in conversation. The one thing she was sure of was that there would be no affair. What had happened she couldn't change, but it wouldn't happen again. She entered the cafe. Grisha was already sitting there. "Hello," silently Dina said, sitting down. "What?" he replied. "So, Dina, no kisses for your lover?" "For God's sake, don't even joke about it," she whispered. "Somebody might hear you." He looked at her in surprise. "After that night, that's all you can say. It was magical. It meant something special to me." Dina took a deep breath and looked sternly at Grisha. "The only thing it meant was that you got yours. You wanted me for a long time, I know. What I don't understand is why. You have Rita, a terrific wife. Your daughter's not even a year old yet." He grinned and shrugged. "It makes it even nicer to know that the faithful wife was with me. I like to get all the things I can't have, or at least the things no one thinks I can have. God, Grisha, I can't believe you're so heartless about all this." Dina marveled. "Well, that's even easier." She looked him straight in the eye. "I'm telling you that I made a terrible mistake, and it will never happen again. I hope you enjoyed getting me, because that's it, never again." "Oh, I don't think so." Gregory laughed heartily and threw the picture on the table. Dina gasped when she saw the pictures. Look at that, Grisha laughed. What a wonderful picture. You bastard, Dina hissed. It's true, he smirked. And you can't talk to me like that. If you don't want this to get out, you'll have to listen to me. Dina knew at once what she was in for. She picked up the picture. Oh, by the way, you can keep it. I have a few copies if you're interested. While Dina sat in silence, Grisha satisfied and nodded. Now that the trouble is over, let's get down to business. You will entertain me whenever I want. Dina looked up, shaking her head. Well, we've already worked it out. I'm sure you'll like it. In fact, the vacations would be a good start too. I don't care what you tell your husband. As long as I have you there by 7:00 p.m. Just to show you that I'm not a bad guy, I'll even give you some underwear I want you to wear. In the meantime, I feel like I'm in a good mood right now. So let's go to my place now. No, silently said Dina. What? I said no. Dina looked at him. I may have made a mistake that I'll probably never be able to fix, but I'm not stupid. If I go along with it, I'll find myself even deeper in your grass. Sooner or later, you'll make me do something that will give the whole story away anyway. He calmed down and leaned back in his chair. What are you going to do? He laughed. Tell your high-minded, honest husband what you are. Yes. One word from Dina completely stunned Grisha. You wouldn't dare, said he. I know Sasha. He'll throw you right out on the street. He might. Dina agreed. And if he does, I can't blame him for anything. I could lose everything. My husband, my children, everything I have. But I have to risk it. I have no choice. Gregory sat there with his mouth open. No, she just wouldn't dare. The whole thing was some kind of bluff. But what if she did? Gregory. He looked up. He was struck by the calm, determined expression on his face. In case you're worried about your role in this case, so worry. I'm afraid your Jewish mother will be upset by this picture, he muttered in panic. Dina looked at him calmly, though everything inside was vibrating. He was digging himself a hole. Yes, my Jewish mother will be very upset, but my Russian dad will be even more upset. Not so much for the picture, as for my mom's upset. But above all, he will be very upset with you, Grisha. Her dad was the vice rector of the Polytechnic and had a close relationship with the management of the university where both Dina and Grisha worked. Dina called for the waiters and asked where to call. This photo is evidence. I don't envy you. I cheated on my husband and will regret it for the rest of my life. Even if Sasha finds a way to forgive me, it will be very hard for me to forgive myself for hurting him and my family. But you'll regret it even more. Daddy, I'm coming to you right away. It's very serious. An hour later, Dina called Sasha from her father's office, asked to come out to meet her at the entrance of her office. Sasha, it is very important. Sasha got worried. What happened? Why suddenly? Dina urgently called him to the entrance hall. Sasha, we need to talk, but before I say anything else, believe me when I say that I love you, that you are the most important person in my life. The serious voice teared him off a little, something he rarely heard from his wife. What is it, Dina? What do you want to tell me? There was clearly an anxiousness in his voice. Aya. Dina trembled and finally continued. I cheated on you with Grisha. You what? Sasha asked, not believing what he had heard. Of course, Dina would not cheat, because they often talked about couples who have burned, walking around saying that they would never do it to each other. A week ago, you weren't at the party. He somehow seduced me. I don't know how it suddenly happened. How could you? The hotness and anger were now evident in Sasha's voice. Do you want to tell me that we're breaking up? No, Sasha, I love you, but I had to tell you what happened. So tell me, Dina. There was obvious bitterness in her voice. I don't know how it happened. He just seduced me and I let him. Please believe me, I feel terrible. Grisha tried to blackmail me today. And she laid out the story of what had just happened. Sasha found it hard to believe, First, that Dina had obviously cheated on him so easily, and even more so that Grisha, the man he knew, would do something like that to him and to Dina. Sasha got up from the bench, I don't know why himself, and suddenly realized that Dina was still sitting there and tears were streaming down her cheeks. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Yes, of course you didn't mean to. Go home. Maybe we'll talk when I get there. With these words, he left without even looking back at Dina. The next few hours passed like a fog. Sasha and someone called from the university and said that Grisha had already been fired and left in an unknown direction. In some ways, this was some relief, but in other ways it only added to the pain that was felt for Dina's betrayal. It may not have been intentional, but still she could have stopped it. She could have fought it, but she didn't. Sasha still wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he knew he had to face her. There wasn't really any place he wanted to go or where he needed to be, so Sasha just wandered around aimlessly until he decided to talk. It was hard and hopeless. Dina had arranged for the kids to spend the night with friends, so there was no need to worry about them coming in or hearing the conversation. But that was probably the only good thing. I don't know what Sasha expected to hear, or for that matter, wanted to hear, but whatever it was, it didn't inspire optimism. Dina kept saying how sorry she was, how much she loved her husband, but she couldn't explain why that was. Sasha tried to ask her what he had done to cause her to cheat, but she essentially had nothing to say. Dina assured her that she would never do anything like that again, but how could she be trusted? It became clear that nothing was going to be resolved tonight. Sasha told Dina that he needed time to think, to decide whether they were getting a divorce or could work things out, and she should give it time. She agreed to visit her sister for a few days, leaving Sasha at home to think about her future. After a week, Sasha did decide to talk to Dina, and they even reconciled, but it was hard for them to live as before. She chastised herself for cheating, and he was angry at himself for not being able to leave, but he couldn't forgive either.